Hello everyone and welcome to another Artist Loft drawing class. I'm your instructor Adrienne Hodge and this is part 2 of a 2-part class on mapping and I always forget the exact titles of the class. It's mapping and contouring faces. So we started, I see Jimena nodding her head, got it right. So we started last week with this photograph of my son, which we'll get to in just a moment, get back to it. And we created the layout of the portrait and mapped out the facial proportions. And then we began to contour the face. So tonight will be part 2, and we will finish mapping and contouring the face. I just want to be clear about the objective of the class like this, just because this portrait may be unfinished by the end of the class tonight. So we're not necessarily going to have a completed full portrait that you might hang on the wall by the end of the class. We just want to make sure that we've covered the concepts of mapping and contouring the face. So I will review what I did last week, and we might have a few questions that will that'll get thrown in the mix, and then we'll see how far we get. But just want to manage expectations as far as the completed project and where we might land by the end of the hour. And then I just wanted to mention the premium class that we have coming up next week. Let me grab my example right here. We've got a premium class on black mixed media paper using the Artist Loft soft pastels. We're going to be creating this monochromatic soft pastel study, and you should have a completed product by the end of this class next week. In this 1-hour class, we will have something that would be, nice to pop into a frame. So if you're looking for a class with a frameable product like that, then that would be a good one to sign up for. And that will be happening next Wednesday at 6 p.m. And you can sign up on the Michaels website under online premium classes. And if you're having a hard time finding the premium classes, they separated the premium and free classes. But if you just even search Michaels premium classes, you should find them. And I see Jimena just dropped the link for that class in the chat. And if you're watching later on YouTube, just search Michaels online premium classes and it should be pretty easy to find. And also, if you missed the part 1 of this class, you can find that on YouTube, or I believe Jimena dropped the link to last week's class in the chat as well. So you can go back and watch that one later, but stick around and you can always just go back and see what you missed. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and switch to my tabletop view. So this was my example from the marketing image for the class, and hopefully my example that I started last week is going to land there. I may have to make some adjustments. So this is, well, let me hang on a second. Let me get rid of these Post-its before I pull that out into the screen. So make sure to tag your work with the hashtags Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes, and follow or tag me on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art. And there's some of my artwork. If you want to check out everything else that I do, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and I have a link tree on my Instagram where you can see other stuff that I have going on. And then we're using the Artist Loft sketching or drawing pencils, graphite pencils. We're going to be using a lot of the heavier pencils tonight. So you're going to definitely want a 6B pencil, an 8B pencil. If you've got that 4B, a 4B and a 6B should get you where we're going. But if you have an 8B, that would be helpful. And last week I was using B pencils, but I was recommending that you use H pencils so that it makes your lines easy to erase. So this was my example from last week, mapping out the facial proportions and beginning to contour the faces. And I realize it looks a little creepy like this with all those contour lines, but the idea is that those lines are laid down nice and light so that they're not necessarily dominating the drawing so much. So I'm going to hold this drawing up super close to the camera so you can see that I have those same elevational lines in this drawing, but they're just so light that they're not as noticeable, but they are there. I've still got those same sort of elevational marks showing you the contours and elevation of the face there. And I also had the printout last week of the photograph that I provided of my son for this class. And I began to draw some of those elevational lines directly onto the photograph last week before we started mapping them in our drawings, just so you could see, you know, how that elevation is, you know, visible even in the photograph, but it's just hard to pick it out. So that's why we're doing this step-by-step class, to make it easy for you to hopefully start to see those contours when you're drawing. And this method can definitely be applied to other photographs, but we're just going step by step with this particular photograph of my son. And I usually do a Q&A after class on Instagram. I'm not going to do it tonight, just because I was actually teaching an in-person class earlier today. It's been a long day. But last week in the Q&A, I had a bunch of really great questions regarding child facial proportions. And one question that I thought was worth repeating here tonight was someone was asking just what are the standard differences between adult facial proportions and child facial proportions, and like, is there a diagram that I could show? Because, you know, we had this diagram for adult proportions that I reviewed at the start of part 1 last week, and I'm not going to go over it again since it's in part 1, but and I've never actually created a child diagram like this, just because it changes so much throughout childhood. I mean, if we were to do that, we'd have to have, and they are out there. I've found them on the internet, and you could Google and find a few diagrams of child facial proportions. But what you're probably going to be looking at is, you know, facial proportions of an infant, facial proportions of a toddler, facial proportions of a preschooler, facial proportions of, you know, 5 to 6-year-old, and so on. It's constantly going to be changing and evolving as that child grows. But the essential takeaway for child proportions is what I mentioned last week a lot in class, and that is that the eyes and the lips are taking up primarily are what are taking up a lot of space on the head. So and then also it's this softness to the cheeks and this roundness to the cheeks. Like when I was drawing the head itself and we were going from general to specific, I dropped the cheek down right here and made it really nice and full and soft. And when I did that, I could just sense that like the head felt like the head of a child. So kind of just think about all the things that one might do to try to look more youthful. Think about plastic surgery. What are the things that one might do in plastic surgery to make themselves more youthful, right? Fillers in the cheeks, plumpness to the lips, things that make the eyes, you know, appear bigger or more striking. You know, nowadays a lot of people are getting the eyelash extensions, which make your eyes really pop and feel bigger in that way. So all of those things are, you know, what makes a person look more youthful. So do the same thing to your drawing. If you're, you know, you're drawing a child and they're not looking as young as you want them to, or you're making the child proportions are not coming across and it's looking, you know, it's not looking like a child, then try to make the cheeks a little plumper, make the eyes bigger, make the lips fuller. And then you know, it really boils down to observation and noticing the spatial differences between the different facial features. So just to compare, I've got this photograph of myself that I've used for a lot of previous classes and I've drawn all over it. You know, just like comparing the length of the distance between my eyes and my lips to the distance, you know, between my son's eyes and lips. It's, you know, everything's much closer together. The eyes are still halfway down on the head from the crown of the head to the chin, but they are, the distance between the eyes and the lips is a lot shorter. The cheeks are definitely a lot fuller, right? My cheeks are more narrow. What else was I going to note? Just comparing, yeah, I guess that's all I wanted to say in comparison there, but also, yeah, the distance in between the eyes. So I mentioned how the width of the face on adult proportions is you've got about the width of an eye in between each eye. So you can measure the width of the eye and then you should be able to get the width of an eye in between the eyes. That's kind of the standard for adult proportions. And on a child, the eyes are much bigger, so it's a little less than that width in between the eyes. You couldn't quite fit one of his eyes in between because the eyes are much wider. So, or just a little bit wider. So just noticing the distances, like the distance between the side of the head and the corner of the eye, or the distance between the nose. And if it helps to, you know, draw on the photograph and create a little connect the dots for these things, like with adult proportions, we talked about how you should have a dotted line that connects from the tear duct to the edge of the nose. And I say you should, and that, you know, these are general rules. The way everybody's facial features deviate from these rules are what make them look specifically like them and have a certain likeness, but you can, you know, take note of where the tear duct will hit on the nostril. So it's not quite at the edge of the nose, it's there. And so then you can kind of see where the space, the distance actually is. And yeah, here it's kind of the same way. It's like more in line with the edge of the nostril there on that side, but that can be really helpful. You should be able to still get a line from the center of the eye and hit the little line that parts the lips, so the corners of the mouth. That's on adult proportions and child proportions. So those things typically do line up. Should be able to get a dotted line from the center of the pupil and hit the corner of the lips. And I realized we didn't finish the second half of his face last week. So that's good to note right there. But anyway, I just wanted to point out some other tips about the proportions in case you were still struggling with that. And with all that being said, I'll go ahead and start finishing the other side of the face, because I jumped ahead because I wanted to make sure last week that we were starting to talk about mapping and contouring the faces. But in the Q&A after class, some folks were asking, were we going to finish the other half of the face? So yes, of course, we're going to do that now, but we maybe won't have a quote unquote finished portrait by the end of the night. So I just want to manage expectations there. Finished is such a relative term too. In my art practice, I don't like the word finished. You know, finished means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I like the word developed. We're definitely going to develop this portrait, but we may not, you know, have every detail covered by the end of the class. I doubt we will get that far, but that's why I tried to leave my example for the promotion for the class a little, you know, feeling incomplete. I'm also a big fan of things feeling a little incomplete too. So anyway, all right. So with all that being said, let's see if we got the nose in the right place, or if I did, using that tear duct as a measurement for myself here. So if I were to sketch a line from the tear duct, I don't quite have the nose wide enough. So I'm going to pull that out a little farther. Are there any questions that are jumping out at this point, Jimena? I realize I just covered a lot of ground and then just moved on.
Not really, not so far.
All right, good. Thank you. So I just extended the side of the nose out a little farther, and then I moved that shadow that I had out a little farther. And in just a moment, I am going to have to take my eraser and maybe erase out some of my contours from the first class just to make them a little less severe so I can start to develop the values a little bit more here and just bring it to life. But even in the other example, I didn't necessarily develop the values all over the portrait. I mostly focused on this side of the face, adding the value and shading, and then a little bit on this eye, but I left a lot of it a little untouched. So that's probably what we'll do tonight as well. Okay, so yeah, if you want to just kind of double check your proportions like I'm doing now and make adjustments as needed. Like I put my circle for the tip of the nose. You know, now that I've moved the side of the nose over, I might want to move my circle for the tip of the nose over a little bit. And then we're really going to let the contours guide us. So we're letting those elevational lines guide us. So if we look at the center of the nose right here, there's always going to be on anything that's round, like even in the very first class in this this drawing series on intro to graphite and drawing forms. I feel like I referenced that class quite a bit. I talked about the surface of an apple and how on the surface of an apple, you will have this center line, this equatorial line, where on one side, the contours will seem to radiate out towards the right. And then on the other side of that equator line, the contours will radiate out to the left on the apple. And it's the same way we talked about this on the lips a little bit last week. Or if I didn't, I will, because it looks like I only started talking about the lips. I definitely talked about in the drawing lips class that I had, which was a premium class. So we can't drop the link to that class, but that's all the more reason to sign up for those premium classes when they come up, because the YouTube links are only sent to those who registered for the class, but it's the same thing. We've got this line at the center of the lips, and then the contours will radiate out in opposite directions. And you can, when you look, you know, through observation, you can see that curve is happening. It's just a little harder for some people to see than others. It definitely takes practice looking. So, but that is what we're doing here on the nose. So the contours are sort of curved out to the left on this side and curved out to the right on this side. And then we start to really feel that roundness to the nose. And we can even do the same thing, you know, to every surface of this photograph. We can map out and draw these contour lines all over the surface, and it's gonna just help us to know where to put that value when we start to add it in. So even within the nostril, we've got the same, it's like a little donut vortex happening here. And we had a whole class on drawing noses, which was another premium class, but I talked about this little, it's like a donut vortex happening around the nostril there. You see what I mean? It's like a donut with the donut hole in the center being the nostril. So we'll get our little donut vortexes in there. Might kind of look like a rainbow too. It really just boils down to observation, noticing the various shapes that make up the forms, and then how those three-dimensional forms are existing within the spatial realm. So are they flat in some places? Do they curve in? Do they curve out? Like right here, I just made a line like that. And I'm like, no, that's not right, because I need to show that it's a high elevation right here. So the way that I'm showing that is by one, the light's going to be hitting it directly. But let's see how we can label the top of the nose. So if this is the top of my mountain, right? This is like a high elevational point. Then what's happening on the side of the mountain to show that the elevation is the highest right there? It gets the curve becomes more of like a diagonal line here down the side, and then it's maybe feels flat, or it arches up like this and then it arches back down, right? So there's like a bridge, and it maybe is a little flat at the top but not very. There's a little point where there's like a plateau. Like think about those little snoring strips. And if you put one of those over the bridge of your nose, or the masks that we have all come to know and love over the past couple of years, how they come to a point right there. So then you got the little squeezy metal part in the mask that covers the bridge of the nose. Think about what the elevation is having to do on your mask right there, and you can follow that same elevational path. So, but then here's the highlight. Here's where the light's hitting it directly, and it's very rounded right here. So it's not flat at the tip of the nose. So maybe we can kind of take our, since we're looking down at the top of an elevational point right there, you can kind of do something like that. That might be a little confusing, but, or you can just leave it blank, since that's where the highlight's going anyway. We don't really need to put a lot of shading or value. And the way I handled it in this one was, yeah, just to leave that blank and adding the shadow on one side of the face. And again, in those premium classes where I broke down the eyes, the lips, and the nose, what I went into in those classes was very specific. You know, so I did an hour-long class on the eyes, an hour-long class on drawing noses and lips, and I basically just did everything I'm doing tonight, but really honed in and focused on that one facial feature. So I am having to kind of abbreviate a little bit here, but the main takeaway for noses is that the light is only going to be hitting very strong, usually on one side of the nose, because the nose is, you know, light is usually coming from a primary source. So in this particular image, the light that's hitting my son's face was coming from the window. Where do you guys think the light was coming from? The left or the right? Tell me in the chat. Where is the light hitting his nose? Is it coming from the left or the right?
We have two lefts, one right.
And we're going to fight it out in the chat.
Right,
okay, so it's coming from my right, looking at it, and his left, right, facing the photograph. It's his left and the viewer's right. So they're both answers are correct, just depending on where we're talking about. We know that because the shadow's falling on this side, on his right. Okay, so so the light's hitting it on this side. So so the shadow is falling on this side of the nose. If we were to force the shadow on this side of the nose, it would be really confusing. Then you're making up light, right? And in the world, the way we see things is based on how the light is hitting them. If I were to light a match in a dark room and put it next to my face, you're going to see me, you know, this photo is always a great one to refer back to because the light was so strongly contrasted. You're only going to see the parts of my face that are illuminated by the light from the match, right? And everything else is going to be in a heavy shadow. So you only see the world and what you're looking at based on how the light is hitting it. So even though we're drawing all of these detailed contour lines across his nose, in our drawing, in order to create the optical illusion of seeing the nose on the paper, we want to leave the light alone on white paper. We want to leave blank paper. So for the folks who are like, are you going to finish the rest of the nose? It's like, honestly, the nose is pretty finished here because I want to leave it blank paper where the light is hitting it. If I were working on toned paper, then I would probably take out a white chalk pastel or a white pastel and, you know, a white color of some sort to make the highlights come across right there. If we were working in black and white, if I was painting it, then I would want to mix up a basic skin tone and then, you know, have the white only where the light is hitting it directly. And that's why I love to use the inverted light to show, you know, how that's coming across. Everywhere in this photograph where it looks dark blue is where it's actually super light in the photograph. And so all the lights are dark and all the darks are light. So everywhere that we're seeing absolute white in the photograph is where we want to have black or some dark values in our drawing. Okay, so I feel like I've explained the contours quite a bit. Let me get this other eye sketched in. So I'm going to kind of just leave the nose alone. I wanted to illustrate what the contours were doing there just so that we could have a full understanding of, you know, why I'm drawing those elevational lines and why the value that we're adding needs to follow this elevational path. But in our drawing, we're really only going to add value on this side of the nose, and we're going to leave everywhere where the light is hitting it. We're going to leave it blank paper for now. Okay, so looking at this eye, I'm going to really just try to get the shapes based on what's visible underneath the hair. So I have this little curl coming forward that's obscuring a lot of what I'm seeing on this side of the face. The hair is really covering a lot here. And I had a whole class on drawing hair a couple months ago, and that was a free class. It was drawing hair in colored pencil. So you can find that one easily on YouTube. Okay, so I've got this shape of a shadow that I'm going to put in for the eyebrow. And I'm going to start with the shape of the pupil and just see if I've got that in the right place before I put anything else in, or the iris, excuse me. So it's a little eclipsed here. It's hard to get the photograph in the screen at the same time as the drawing. There we go. So it's a little eclipsed by his upper lid and the bottom lid right here. And I'm only seeing a tiny little crescent moon shape of the whites of his eyes. And then I've got the tear duct right there. And then I can double check myself. Does the tear duct line up with the edge of his nostril? And does the edge of the nose come out a little further than the tear duct? And it does. So it looks like I've got it in about the right place. Then I'm going to put a little shape there for the reflective light that I'm seeing. And then the other lighter shape that I'm seeing within the eye. And then I'm going to leave the rest of it alone for now. We're going to go in with a heavier pencil and put all of our dark shapes in. Once we get everything mapped out, we're going to just fill in all of our darkest values. And that's going to really make a lot of this portrait come to life and feel a little more developed here. The eyebrows are a lot of individual hairs that we read as a mass. So I'm just kind of sketching those in briefly here, but if it helps to do the contours over those, I'm gonna grab a white pen that I can draw over the photograph with a little bit here so you can see my lines for the contours here. So here's what the elevation is doing here. Kind of same thing on the nose, but only turned on its side. So we've got something like that. Like this. So I'm just really observing this. So if you're trying to do this over a different photograph of someone else, just really notice how, you know, what the elevation of the surface of the face is doing in these different areas. You could even do this to the hair. Find the elevational path of the hair. And the eye has a similar. We went into this quite a bit in the pet portrait class on drawing a pet. I talked about the elevation of the eye of the dog Biscuit that we all drew together. So I know it starts to look a little creepy like that, like I'm putting spider webs everywhere, but we're drawing a bunch of spider webs. Okay, so if you wanted to sketch in those elevational lines right there, you can, but I'm going to go ahead and just sketch in the heavier shadows. So I've got a shadow underneath that hair that's falling across the face. And in all of my classes in this series, I feel like I talk about contour lines and value shapes. So as we're sketching in the contours, we're also highlighting these value shapes where we're going to add our shading in just a moment. So a lot of where I'm putting the heavier contour lines is where I'm going to be adding the shadows. So I might not need to erase so many of them. I might just leave them there and then add the shadows and see what needs to be erased. But let's see if I missed any value shapes. The easiest way to check myself to see if I knocked a bunch of pencils off my desk. I was sweeping those erasing shavings away. Is I can look at my inverted light photograph and I can see where some of those absolute shadows are everywhere where it, you know, it's showing up nice and light. So I got the nostrils, I got the eyes and the eyebrows, and I got all these heavier shapes, but I missed this little shadow right here under his lip. So let me get that little, like a banana shape of a shadow going. And then right here, it's a lot lighter. So that's where it's going to be a darker shadow. So there's a little bit of a shadow right here on the side of the face connecting the nose and the lips. And to draw what the elevation is doing right there within that shadow. So I'm focusing my attention of the contour lines, the elevational lines, to the areas where the shadows are, because those contour lines, mapping the contours there, are going to help us to know how we should add our shading. So it all comes together when we add the shadows in. Hopefully it's all starting to make sense why I'm drawing spider webs all over my son's face, because it's going to help us to know where we need to fill in those shadows to capture some likeness here. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Let's see, we're going to add a shadow here, so let's go ahead and put the elevation there. And yeah, we are going to have a shadow right here, so it would be helpful to illustrate that on the drawing itself. I'm going to have some landscape classes coming up in July, some landscape study classes, and I'm going to apply all this to landscapes. It's the same idea when we're talking about the elevation of a mountain or the elevation of a beach shore. It's the same sort of mapping the elevational curve. We didn't talk about the neck at all, but the neck is very rounded. So we want to maybe get this shadow in here a little bit under the neck, at least just a tiny bit. So we've got a curved line because the neck is very cylindrical, but then it kind of radiates out like this. So our spider web is doing something like that right here. And then maybe we'll put this little shadow here where there's a sunken in moment. So we can make sure we illustrate that it's curved inward right there. And then we've got this big shadow on the side of his collar. Oh, and here's a trick for seeing where I noticed a few people were maybe struggling with wanting to know where to put the shoulders in their sketch. It's all about measuring distances and comparing, making that map. So in our map here, the shoulder is right in line with the center of the lips. Look at that. So I can just go to my drawing and say, here's the center of the lips, the shoulders underneath his hair sticking out right about there, and it curves down next to his hair, and there's the collar. So if you've got the shoulder like way down here by his chin, or somewhere else, move it up so that it's right in line with the center line at the center of the lips. Okay, and then the same thing over here. It's still in line, but it's more of a diagonal line curving down. So maybe look at the negative space right here. There's a little triangle shape. So we've got this little curl of hair in the way that comes in front of the neck. Let me scoot this up. We've got the curl, the hair, and then we've got a little triangle of negative space, and then the collar. So something like that. And then this shadow is, let's see, what can we line that up with? Oh, we can do that with the corner of the mouth too. So corner of the mouth, make a diagonal line that swoops down and makes it a triangle for the shirt. And that should line up pretty well with the corner of the mouth as well. So it's all about observation and making those measurements and seeing where you can line things up and double check yourself. Okay, any questions at this point before I start adding some nice rich value in here and making this come to life?
No question. Oh, just one question actually. Do you know by any chance if you will be teaching eyes and nose classes again in the future? Are there any plans for that?
At this point, I am not sure. I know, we had those premium classes, and then this was kind of my solution, because I do recognize I'd love for there to be a free class that's, up on the, on YouTube to reference on all of these things, because I know a lot of people have questions about them. So I thought if I did a class like this where I kind of quickly ran through all of this stuff again, then I could, touch on all of this stuff, in a class that could be easily referenced on YouTube. So this was kind of my my solution was I was like, well, let me throw one in there that's like kind of reviewing everything that we've recently covered in those premium classes. But I realized, yeah, I'm not able to go in depth right now. So at this time, I'm not sure, but hopefully there will be. There are going to be a lot of figure drawing classes going forward. I just completed a photo shoot with a model to get reference images for several different figure drawing classes that will be coming up in this series, and I'm very excited about that. But we're going to be breaking down, you know, hands and feet and torsos and, you know, all the different body parts for you. So I'm not sure if we're going to go back and do what we've already done in depth again, but I'll definitely let you know what's on the horizon as it comes up.
Sounds perfect. I will put, not all classes have been posted. However, I do have the link to the hand class and a flower class that's coming up as well. So I'll put this in the chat.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the hand clash is already listed. It's with a wooden mannequin hand. And then there's another one on blind contour studies of the hand, which is going to be really helpful. And it's for all ages. So I tried to make that one like, how would I teach drawing hands to a 3-year-old? So I'm really going to break hands down in a very easy to digest way. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, and I even tested that out with a private lesson student recently, and it was really fun to see the aha moment that that student went through as I was breaking down the drawing hands. Just simplified it to its most basic shapes, and then talked about contours and value shapes and went from there. It's kind of my MO. All right, so I've got my 6B pencil, and now I'm gonna look for all of my absolute darks, my 10 on the value scale. So where am I seeing my darkest values? And that is everywhere that's like searing white in the photograph. So on the side of the face here, and in the eyes, and a lot of the hair and the nose. So, and the corners of the lips, right? So we're going to start with the side of the face and our 6B pencil, and I'm drawing on the side of my pencil so that I'm not creating a hard indentation in the paper. And if I did need to erase this out, I still could, letting it sit on the surface of the paper. And I'm going to start to get a nice full dark value happening here. And I'm just going to not worry about really rendering the hair too much. As you can see in the other example, if I pull it back out, I really implied the hair more than rendering the hair here. So I'm just kind of creating a block of a dark shadow on the side of the face. And that's going to push the roundness of those cheeks forward. Like even just adding that shadow, it starts to make the elevation come forward. So in art, you have all these different levers that you can pull to make the magic happen. And you definitely want to pull your contrast lever where you see contrast. You don't want to miss the opportunity to pull the contrast lever, because that's where you're making some magic happen. Because even just doing that is making the 3 dimensions of the roundness of the face come forward, right? Okay. Kind of just leave that alone for a minute, leave it nice and loose here. Maybe I'll go up a little bit into the hair. And then there's this other very deep shadow in the hair. So same thing, I'm using the side of my 6B pencil, not the tip of it. the tip is gonna, get embedded into the paper and be harder to erase. But drawing on the side of the pencil, you're just letting your value sit on the surface of the paper, and it will be a little easier to pull out if you do need to erase anything. Even though you're committing to a dark value, you're not fully committing to it if you keep your pressure nice and even on the side of the pencil. And then just following the curve of that curl. That one really dark, rich curl. I'm looking at my other example and realizing I didn't draw the other one quite this way, but this is what I'm doing here. And then I'm just gonna block in over here a little bit. Okay, that's good. All right, now let's look at the eye. So we're looking at this whole mass, this whole big shape right here. Instead of drawing one eyelash at a time, it's easier to just fill in that entire shadow. And then maybe just have a few little wispy lines coming out for the eyelashes. And then it gets nice and dark in the center of the eye and the pupil. We're leaving that space for the reflective light, leaving the blank paper there, nice and dark around the iris. Pulling up on my pressure a little bit there. I'm not doing like a hard line all the way around. And then I'm going to radiate out from the center of the pupil with a lighter pressure to get the texture of the iris to come across a little bit. And then put a few darker lines in there just to get some interesting texture like I'm seeing. And the shadow comes down a little bit and kind of goes into the iris a little bit for the eyelashes. All right, that looks pretty good. And then the whites of the eyes are actually not as white as we may think they are. They actually are kind of more of a 2 or a 3 on the value scale. Maybe right here it is pretty white right there by the edge. So maybe I'll take my eraser and erase out some of the graphite that creeped its way in right there. But definitely on this side of the eye, I'm going to go to like a 2B pencil and make that a little more in shadow there. And then we've got the eyelashes curving out right here. Okay. I'm going to stick to that 2B pencil for a while and start to fill in some of the value around on this side of the face using the 2B, and I'm still working on the side of my pencil and following those elevational curves. So yeah, like I said, I might not need to erase some of these lines that I've added because I'm going to go over them and create a shadow. Like there's this shadow on the side of the face right here that might cover up those elevational lines. And then if it feels too dark, I can just erase it a little bit, maybe use the side of my eraser so that, well, let's see, I had another eraser that just pulling that paper off a little bit. So if I use the side of the eraser, I can kind of do a bit of a uniform erasing here, and then maybe use a lighter pencil to put it back in. So actually, let's use an H pencil here. I'm using an H, but I'm still using the side of the pencil to put it in and still following those contours. So the contour lines are really just there as a guide for you to know where to put your value. And if they start to really distract you, you know, as you're going and you're like, okay, I got it. I know where to put the value, and you're ready to kind of take the training wheels off, then you can erase some of those contour lines and then just make sure as you're putting your value in that you're following those elevational lines. And if you like the way they look, then leave them there. You know, I left them there in this drawing, but they were also super light, so they didn't show up quite as much. Let's see how we doing on time. I feel like we're getting close to the end of the hour. Oh geez, yeah, we got 7 minutes left. Okay, let me move on to some of the meat and potatoes here a little bit more. So, all right, we got the shadow on the side of the nose. Might have to just speed it up here a little bit, folks. But that big shadow, so I'm just filling it in and I'm following those lines. So my side of my pencil is following that those same contours. I'm applying them in that directional path. They were going in a diagonal direction, so I applied the shadows with the side of my pencil in a diagonal, or yeah, like in a diagonal path across the side of the nose. The hair for the eyebrows, I'm just putting that in, following by observation the direction that I see them going, and then maybe I'll do one big mass here, but just let a few of them stick out. Okay, and then we've got the center of the nostril. But if you've put all of your mapping and contour lines in all the right place, then this is basically just going to draw itself, you know? Aren't you guys finding that your drawing is just drawing itself out there? Okay, good. I see some heads nodding. I love it. I was kind of being facetious, but good. I'm glad you feel that way. Okay, and then we've got this on a dark line here at the corner of the mouth. That was our big value shape right there, where it was light in the inverted light. And then I'm really just going to shade this side of the face mostly, because like I said, we don't have the time to fully develop this whole thing and talk about everything we're doing as we go in an hour or even a 2-hour class, but I feel like we covered a lot of ground here. Let's go ahead and do this other eye just for the sake of it not looking. I'm just filling in that whole mass. The other eye is really dark, so you could almost get away with just taking the side of your pencil and just making everything dark right here except for that reflective light. And then just noticing a few details. Implied line is your best friend. When we look at clouds or bathroom tiles or curtains, we are constantly seeing shapes that look like faces. And, you know, our eyes want to see what's familiar to us. So we don't have to suggest that much to a viewer for them to say, oh yeah, that's the other eye. Like if we put a bunch of detail into this eye, then the viewer is going to look at that and they're going to want to complete the picture by seeing another eye over there. So you don't have to give a viewer that much information for them to read the visual information as another eye. I mean, I didn't have to shade that too much for it to feel balanced in that regard. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna get a little bit of the shadow on the side of the neck. And if you really got in here with all of, you know, your H&B pencils and matched the value where you're seeing them in the photograph, then you just want to make sure that you're leaving space for those absolute highlights. So everywhere where you see absolute black in this photograph or really dark, so that would be, you know, here at the top of the nose, this big shape on the side of the nose was where we left it blank, right? If any graphite creeps in there, then you just want to erase that out so that those highlights stand out. So on the lips, that's where there's a nice little highlight on the lips. So I drew those little kind of like a speckled egg right there because I wanted to shade all this, but then erase out those highlights that are happening. So with limited time, that's a little tricky, but that was the point there. Let's see, what else can I add real quick before we run out of time? I think that's about all I've got time for, folks, but that was pretty good. And I'd love to see where you all landed in your drawings. Oh my gosh, I'm seeing some gorgeous examples out there. Yeah, Jimena, can we spotlight some people?
Of course. So
Christina's, oh my gosh, that looks like my son. You really captured him.
we have, I think, Diane, if I recall
Oh,
correctly.
Diane.
Yeah.
That is gorgeous. Oh my gosh, please send me a copy of that. Holy moly, that is amazing.
And then we have
Diane.
Christina.
Wow. Wow, Christina. Yes, the lips. That was, oh, you captured him so well. Oh gosh, please email me a copy of this or send it to me on Instagram or somewhere. I really want to share these with him too. He'll be so excited.
We have Sarah.
Oh, nice, Sarah. Oh, that's come so far since last week too. I remember you holding that up. Sarah's one of our regulars that's been here from the very beginning.
Oh, yeah. We have Valerie. Oh, there we are, Valerie.
Let me see, Valerie. Oh, hold it up.
A little to your left.
Oh,
More to your left. There we go.
oh yeah. All right. Yeah, it's so amazing how you guys are capturing his likeness in different ways. It's coming across.
And then we have Lois.
Oh, wow. Oh, those soft values are so nice. I hope, are you finding that the contour lines like that are helping you where to know where to put the value? It's so nice and soft. I love it.
And oh, 1 second. It moved on me. Arthur.
Oh, Arthur, yes. Arthur's another regular that's been here since the beginning. Oh, the nose, the contours on the nose is so strong.
We have Amy.
Very nice.
And we have Zoom user. I don't know who that is, but Zoom, there we are.
Okay, nice.
And we have Pat.
Very nice, Pat.
And A. Richards.
Oh, hold it up a little higher. Yes. Wow. Oh, the eyes there's some emotion coming across there.
And then we have Brandy.
A little bit of a glare, but oh, that's so strong. Oh, there we go. Yeah, nice. Yeah, nice soft values there as well.
We have Salemnitos.
Oh, wow. Yes.
And Mary Ann. Hi.
You have the little cat too. It's so cute. Oh, it's disappearing into that background a little bit. Oh, but I see it. Yes.
There we are.
Yeah.
And Kathleen.
Oh, wow. You captured some emotion there too, Kathleen.
and Sarah,
I
another
want to
Sarah.
have a class on capturing emotion and expression at some point. I've been kind of abstractly planning that one for a while. So that's how I'll tie eyes back in. I want to do expressive eyes. That's one
And
idea I have. Nice.
I
All
believe
right.
that's
Well,
all.
what a great class, y'all. Oh, that's so rewarding seeing all those examples. And yes,
So
please.
there's,
Oh, is
I was
there
gonna
more?
say, I think someone drew you. Lynn, I'm gonna spotlight Lynn real fast.
Okay.
That might be you.
Wow.
Like you. I don't know.
No, I think that's Jack, but it does look like me. Is it me? He looks so much like me. You never notice how much, somebody was saying in my class earlier today, like how to really get to know something in nature. Like you can never know a tree until you draw it. And I was like, I think that goes for people too. And yeah, the first time I drew my son after doing so many self-portraits, it's like, wow, he really is just a mini me. We have such similar facial structures. So thank you guys so much. So wonderful. Yes, please share those with me. It's so fun to see everybody's drawings. And thank you so much. And hopefully I'll see all of you in the premium class next week and we'll do those soft pastel monochromatic studies. And those should be really fun and rewarding too. All right. Thank you and have a great evening, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, Jimena.